Hey tryhards, Ethan here. Before we get into the show today, I want to talk to you guys about Patreon. Patreon is a donation service, a monthly subscription service where you donate money to me to support the show, to support the growth of it, whether that means merchandise or more podcasts or other things of that nature. And I would really appreciate if you guys would be willing and able to give just a little bit of whatever extra money you may have. Because while the show will always be free for everyone to listen, the way to make it isn't. And I'm in college, and things are expensive. So I'd appreciate any little amount that you're able to give. So thank you for donating, and thank you even more for listening.
Hello, my name is Ethan Hewlin. Like you, I live in a world that never stops moving. Also like you, I have stories. These are my stories, the true stories of a tryhard. Welcome back to True Stories of a Tryhard. I'm Ethan Hewlin, and this week it is just me, but I'm here to talk about an all-important question that not many of us truly know the answer to. How are you? Now, we are asked this question a lot, whether it's on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, or what have you. We are all asked a derivative of the question, how are you? And I'm here to tell you that not all of us are answering it correctly. Some of us might be, but those chances are few and far between. The question, how are you, is now seen as more of a, formality than anything else. It's just a way to get a conversation started with nothing really too serious about taking into account the actual purpose of the question. And most of us rattle off an answer, good, fine, all right, etc. But have you ever really stopped to think about what that question means? How are you? It's a time to reflect, to self-assess where you are right now emotionally, physically, spiritually, and really express how you feel on the inside, and not all of us take enough advantage of that. Something we really don't see enough of, honestly. True honesty with ourselves and with others when confronted about how we are, especially in the times that we live in, with the world on fire, and sometimes literally on fire. We need to be able to be honest, because if nothing else, honesty is a breath of fresh air from some of the things that have been happening. So today, we're going to talk about how to answer that question honestly without telling your life story and upsetting the conversation entirely. It's something that I've not mastered, but gotten better at over the past 3 years or so. So let's start with something that we are all familiar with in some way. A physical assessment of how we feel physically. Are we sore? Are we tired? Are we rested? Are we relaxed? Are anything like that. So if someone asks you, how are you? You can say, I'm tired. I'm sore. I'm actually well rested. Something like that. Next is emotionally. How are you feeling? What's your general disposition like? Are you drained? Are you relaxed? Are you anxious? Things like that. So if somebody asks, how are you? You can say, I'm feeling a little anxious right now. I've been a little down recently. Or I've been just emotionally drained by everything that's happening in the world right now. And then let's talk about spiritually. I know not everybody listening believes in a higher power, but I do. And in my case, it's God. So how is my relationship with God or your relationship with your higher power? Like, what's the status of that? How is that going between the two of you? I know it's not the same for everybody, but for me, my relationship with God is something I take very seriously. And being able to have open communication with him is something that is very important to me as well. So if someone asks, how are you? And you could say, I've been spiritually full. I've been spiritually empty. I've been trying to work on filling up my spiritual tank, as it were. So that's some other things that you could say when someone asks, how are you? So what does this look like in practice? How does this play out eventually? Well, I'll tell you. As those of you who have listened for a while know, I am not exactly a people person. So when someone asked me the question, how are you? I was just as ready to just brush somebody off and move on with my day as quickly as possible. So those standard answers like good, fine, etc., they were always in the back of my mind, and I would have a mechanical response to that question. But the older I get, the more I realize that it is important to be honest with yourself and others in any situation, because if nothing else, that one answer is a snapshot of your life that they now have access to. And they can talk about that. You can build on that, and from that, you can build your relationship at whatever level it is. I remember pretty early on when I was going to see my therapist. And I was about 10, maybe 11 years old. And I had just come off the loss of my first basketball game of the season. And I didn't like that very much. And I had kind of been mulling it over and doing what I do of making it feel like it was my fault, when in reality that may have been the case, but most of the time it wasn't just my fault. And my therapist came to get me from the waiting room as he usually did, and we walked back to his office. And as we were walking back there, he said, he greeted me, hi, Ethan, and then he asked me, how are you? And one of those mechanical responses came out, good, fine, etc. And then we stopped in the middle of the hallway on the way to his office. And he looked me in the eye, and he said, are you sure? And I'd never thought I would get that far with that question, or that answer, because most people just brush it off. He said, Ethan, I know what we're going to talk about today. And we continued into his office, and he sat me down, and he said, Ethan, you really need to think about that question. How are you? Because giving someone just a little snapshot of where you are is a very important thing. And it's a very important thing for you. And so we proceeded to talk about what had been happening with me and what had been going on with my basketball season. And that was during the time when my mom and dad were getting the divorce finalized. So that was going on top of that. I was, doing stuff at school that I hadn't necessarily done before. I was kind of acting outside of what had become normal for me, or how people had perceived to be normal from me, because I didn't know how to express my feelings about what was happening at home. And that's the case for a lot of kids. And I learned at 10 years old that being able to be honest with yourself and honest with other people has an impact. And history repeated itself when I got into high school. I was at my church's youth group on a Wednesday night, and my small group leader came up to me because apparently I had a certain look about me, and he said, Ethan, how are you? And I said, fine. And he said, are you sure? And at that time, that was when I was struggling with thoughts of suicide, and something that I had really been considering. And that one question, how are you, changed the trajectory of my entire night. It did. And I told him about how my friends, or those who I thought were my friends, had kind of turned me away, and how I'd really been thinking about what the world would look like if I wasn't there. And he told me, Ethan, you need to talk to those friends. Because chances are, if they do know what they did, they don't know the impact it's had on you. And then I, in turn, flipped that on its head. One of my friends had been struggling with those same thoughts, and I asked her how she was. And she told me, Ethan, I don't feel like I belong here. And I said, I know the feeling. And she said, no, I mean, I don't want to be alive anymore. And so we ended up calling her parents because I told my mom about it. Because I didn't feel like that was something that I should keep to myself. And I did that twice for 2 different people. And the power of that question and the power in answering it honestly is something that should not be taken lightly. As far as how I am right now, that's a bit of a complicated question. If you've learned anything else from this episode so far. I'm in a very mixed state of emotions right now. I'm at the school I want to be at, studying the subject I want to learn and eventually use in my career, but at the same time, there's a lot happening around me that I cannot control. And control, that is something that I really like to have. And the older I get, the more I realize I'm not really in control of a lot. And the more I have to deal with that reality. That my life is controlled by a lot of different people in a lot of different places doing a lot of different things. And I'm, at times, subject to other people's mistakes, other people's failures, other people's successes. Those are all put on me. And I know that might seem kind of strange to hear, but that is the way that I think about the world a lot of times. Is that it's in a deep way that can't exactly be expressed through small talk. So here we are. And maybe, if somebody's willing to listen, you can get to that point. Another thing about asking the question, how are you, is you have to be prepared for the answer. Because it may not be as simple as good, fine. And you have to be willing to listen to what people have going on in their lives. And having an open ear and an open mind is something that people, at least in my experience, value. So keep that in mind the next time you ask somebody that question. And be prepared for what they have to say, because everything may not be as it seems, and that's okay. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in this week to True Stories of a Tryhard. You can find me on Instagram, ethan.t.hewlin. You can find me on Twitter at etphonehome. Those are zeros and the e's are threes. You can find the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at True Stories Pod.
The best way to get the word out about podcasts is via word of mouth and social media. So please, please, please share this with your friends, share it on your social media, and if you post it in some way and tag me, you will get featured on the official podcast accounts. And please feel free to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. I would very much appreciate it.
I'll be back with more stories next week. So until then, this is Ethan Hewlin, signing off.